Hello, my name is Tabitha Davies, and I am your presenter for Understanding Management. Here's my introduction for who I am. You can pause and read it if you would like. Otherwise, I'm just going to continue on. Um, so, when we're talking about management, because I'm going to jump right in here on this topic, it's really important to understand what management is and what management isn't. And I say this really broad scope because the way that you're going to manage a dog who, when you walk in the front door, is jumping all over you, versus how you're going to manage a dog who wants to bite your guests, versus how you're going to manage a dog who is completely petrified of sounds or certain experiences within the environment of your neighborhood and tries to run back home, are all going to be very different. But the foundational aspect of management is that we want to prevent access to the animal's ability to practice or engage in the unwanted behavior while ensuring that the animal's needs are met and that it is a plan that works with the human's life. What it is not is putting the dog in a crate or kennel 24/7, or excessively, meaning like the dog is basically put in a box and forgotten about until you can handle dealing with something. Putting the dog in a situation where they're going to show or engage in the behavior and use corrective devices or strategies, making the dog be in proximity to things that will make them behave in an unwanted manner without teaching replacement skills. And it's also not where you separate your dog and everything seems to be better when you decide to put them back out into whatever environment or situation they struggled with previously, seeing that it goes well that first time and thinking that it's just resolved itself with a break. Because that happens a lot. Clients will contact us and talk to us about their dog's struggles, and then they'll talk about how it got better after they did some separation, or they did some really restrictive management, and then they just kind of threw the dog back into the deep end to say, and the dog did okay initially, and then it devolved and it actually got worse. And we're going to get into why that commonly happens in a little bit. But management can be really simple and it can also be very complex. It really depends on what you're dealing with. The lifestyle of the humans, obviously, the more people that are involved, is the more um, complex the strategies can become. And that kind of brings us into de escalate versus escalate. So, we as people are really good at reacting emotionally to situations, especially with our dogs, especially with relatives, with our kids, things like that. We're not really great at responding just overall. It's a learned skill. And, there's generations of us who didn't learn these skills. So, part of my job when I'm working with a client is helping them learn how to identify not just their dog's reactions to triggers, but also what their dog's behavior triggers in them and how to help regulate it. Meaning that's, referrals out to like handlers and humans, referrals for them to talk to their therapist, referrals for mental health specific support groups. And a lot of people go, "Oh my God, really?" Yeah, because when you're dealing with a dog that has a complex behavior issue, and not everyone does, you're dealing with something that is emotionally taxing. And that can absolutely play into how well our management plans or strategies function. And so I am not a mental health professional and I can give them strategies and tips and I can talk about things that I've learned from my parenting journey and my journey as a um, behavior professional as well. But really, that becomes something where it's like, hey, this might be something where you can just like trauma dump on your therapist about everything that's going on with your dog, because it doesn't mean that you don't love your dog, but it can definitely be situations where you have a client and their dog's behavior, and they love their dog and they're not going to get rid of their dog, and that's okay, and their feelings are valid, but definitely bring up emotional trauma that they had growing up or as an adult. And, that stuff needs to be dealt with outside of the training session. So being able to have those complicated conversations. Some people don't need that. I mean, if you have a dog who's just, you come home and they're jumping all over you, for some people, that's very triggering. For other people, it's not. So it really depends on the situation. And it doesn't matter how complex the behavior issue is, because it depends on how it impacts not just the dog, but the human. So, talking about de escalating versus escalating. And I bring this up because a lot of times when people are discussing management, They're discussing the fact that you're coddling the dog, or you're going to reinforce the dog's anxiety, or reinforce the dog's stress, or reinforce the dog's emotional um, feelings about something. And you can change an emotional response, but you cannot reinforce that emotional response in the way that people are describing it. So, an example of that, one of the fallacies is a dog is being cuddled and pet during a thunderstorm because it is shaking and whining and wants to sit on the human's lap. The dog's stress is not being reinforced; it's being managed. The person is giving them things to help them cope and prevent them from going into a full-on, eating the walls, running into windows, type of panic. The dog is able to kind of de-escalate on the owner's lap. But we're not sitting here reinforcing the dog's stress response to thunderstorms. That's already there. The dog is already afraid of the thunderstorms. We are helping the dog manage through that fear. We are not telling the dog, oh, yes, be terrified. There's ways that you could potentially make a fear response worse. There's a lot of training methods that'll do that, but it's not going to be the catalyst of like reinforcing that emotional response. Um, Another one is a dog learns that whenever another dog is present, they get to play fun games and eat snacks, and they start responding to that dog by the dog's presence, I should say, by focusing on the human versus barking and lunging, meaning your protocols are working because we're obviously working on things under threshold. We're obviously pairing things to create a positive emotional response towards that trigger. That doesn't mean that the dog sees the other dog and goes, oh, yay, best friend. That means that we've taught the dog how to not be completely terrified and have a more exciting experience of engaging with the human in the presence of that specific trigger. This is not an example. This is like an example. A dog sits near crowds of people and dogs and it's held on a tight leash while it's barking and lunging until they stop barking and lunging. That's learned helplessness and flooding. Um, if it's done over and over and over again, it becomes where the dog just learns there's nothing that they can do to stop it from happening and they just shut down. By putting them in the situation where they're sitting near crowds of people and dogs, that is flooding. Um, those are examples of how it looks like the dog is learning something or feels differently, or maybe safer in that situation, but it's actually not. And I want you to think about these and think about what it means to de escalate versus escalate, because that last one was an example of an escalation because it got worse first, right? And I want you to think in your life or in not just with your dog, but with other people's dogs or things that you've experienced watching TV or seen online, whatever. And think about in what scenarios does it get worse first and realize that that is escalation. And also do the same thing. Think about in what scenarios have you watched it calm down instead of escalate. So instead of it getting worse from where it's at, somebody does something to help calm it down. And that can be with people, that can be with animals. It doesn't have to be dog specific. So, our goals for management is reducing stress for the dog and the humans. And this is a key point because if you are looking at how you can manage um, something that you're struggling with behavior wise with your dog, and it's too difficult for the human, and the human has added stress into it, it's not going to be something that is followed through. So, it's actually something that is going to cause them to not engage in management, the humans at that point, because it's too difficult. And if it's something that's very stressful for the dog's not going to want to engage in this alternative strategy or skill that can help manage the behavior, which is also not appropriate because it's not giving us our end goal. Um, we want to customize and integrate our management plans easily into the human's life while meeting all of the dog's needs, because it's very important that people realize like management, a lot of times people talk, oh, well, you can't just put them in a crate, you can't just put them in a kennel. You're right, you can't, but you can give them crate and rotate if we're also giving that dog separate time to have their hierarchy of needs assessments done and make sure that their needs are being met. Like maybe we have to crate and rotate because we're a one person household with inner household aggression issues. We're not going to have multiple dogs running around the house in basket muzzles just hoping they don't get into a fight or living under the idea of they're wearing a basket muzzle. So even if they get into a fight, they can't hurt each other because that is inappropriate, non effective attempts at management. So we have to create something that works. And sometimes that's using X pens or baby gates so that they can still be in the same spaces, but there's no direct access. Make building replacement behaviors easier. There are times where you go to someone's house, and I'm just going to use the dog jumping on you as like the easiest go-to example here. Someone has multiple dogs in their home. They all run up to the front door and they're super excited that their humans are home and they jump all over them. The people cannot make it in their door um, to get stuff. Now, maybe they had a dog trainer come in and say, hey, put a baby gate back here and they have to stay back here. But then they're going, but I don't want to have to come in my house and try to fiddle with baby gates just to deal with the same behavior on the other side because they haven't calmed down. Or I'm standing here with all my groceries and I have to wait before I can get into this space to be able to do that. And we could, on one hand, teach all of these dogs individually and then combine them so they're still working together until they're as a group to be triggered by the door to go to their bed and sit on their bed. The amount of time that it takes to do something like that might be not only overwhelming for the family, um, but just take forever. And it might be something that they're just looking at like, I don't want to deal with that right now. Um, and we can look at that and say, okay, do we have any resource guarding issues? Do we have any history of food aggression issues? Do our dogs enjoy sharing meals, toys? You know, do they listen to each other's body language communication? If I were to throw a handful of food on the floor and they all started scavenging, would they be okay with it? Would they be comfortable with that? And if the answer to that is yes, we can kiss it. Keep it simple, sweetie. We can take a handful of treats and throw it behind the dogs. So the dogs are moving away from the humans. They're going after the candy that becomes present when the humans walk in the door. The dogs are redirected onto that. Now they're scavenging. Now they're taking that surge of energy and they're putting it elsewhere. The owners can walk in the house. So the dogs aren't practicing the jumping. By the time that they really get to re-acknowledge, like the cookies have stopped and the owners are here, they're calmer. They're not wanting to engage in jumping. So we have taken a situation where somebody walks in the door and they're getting clobbered by 4 or 5 of their dogs at one time. They can't go anywhere. And we've now switched it into something where as we move, the dogs move away from us. There's no direct contact. The dogs are scavenging. They're getting used to somebody comes in, we move back here. We don't jump on you. And then when you guys are in the door and everybody settled down, we get to say hi. We do this and we modify it with small things until we get to the point where we're walking in the door and our dogs just run towards the back part of the house, don't jump on us, and stay nice and calm with their feet on the floor because they haven't been able to practice the unwanted behavior and they get reinforced for all the alternative and incompatible other behaviors, which is setting everyone up for success. It's something that is simple. They can easily do it. It works with their household. Now, can there be modifications for that? Absolutely. You can be as creative as you need to be. In this particularly, like I'm speaking to primarily owners of dogs who have reactivity and aggression issues who need to look at how they can manage their dog's behavior um, in an easier way for them so we can prevent access to the unwanted behavior. Because even if you're not working with a professional yet, or you just don't want to and you want to DIY it, you need to have management involved. And management doesn't mean that we're like putting, which is like a Learberg thing, putting our dog in a box and putting them up on a shelf until we're ready to work with them. Like a lot of people seem to think it is. Management is about modifying the environment and adapting it to your dog's particular needs and your particular needs so that we can prevent them from engaging in what we don't want and allow them to engage in what we do want. So, um, anything from a spatial awareness activity, teaching a dog how to not jump up on kids, how to have space when they're going up and down stairs. Those are training activities, but how do we manage it? Well, we don't let the kids and the dogs go up and down the stairs together. We have baby gates at the stairs. We have X pens around the stairs, things to prevent it from happening in the first place. So, some facts about management. When you use it, you are reducing the likelihood of the unwanted behavior being repeated. Because a lot of times, when you have to add in management, it is because the behavior is self reinforcing, meaning they don't need you to supply them with anything in order for the behavior that they're engaging in to be reinforcing for them. Whatever they're doing, whether they're barking out the window at somebody who's walking by and they bark, 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 bark till that person disappears out of view, your dog is like, yeah, I did it. I made them go away. I'm amazing. Especially if you're like, oh my God, Chauncey, shut up. Chauncey, be quiet. Chauncey, knock it off. Your dog is just like, hey, man, they're barking with me. I've got backup. This is amazing. But if we install blackout curtains or we put opaque window clings so we still get all our natural light, but our dog's visual is blurred, our dog can't see what's out the door. So if we're dealing with something that's auditory or olfactory, then that's different. But if we're just doing something visually, cool. While we're teaching other skills, we've now prevented the ability for them to bark and lunge and go all over the window with a really high arousal level because there's nothing for them to look at. But we're not sacrificing all of the nice natural light we get from our big front windows. So there are ways to do it that's fun. If you use it and it works within your life or modify it when needed, because there's times where you're going to slowly take it away, um, you can use it with less overwhelm at the start. So if you're working with a professional and they give you a management plan and it doesn't seem doable. Now, there are some times where you're dealing with serious behaviors and it's going to be something where it's really, really restricted because management is always super restrictive at the beginning. And a lot of times people will engage in it for a short period of time and then they'll just stop because it's too much for them. And sometimes, depending on the complexity of the behavior, that is how it's going to be. You have to be really, really restrictive, but it's not long term. Normally, except in very rare cases, our management is not long term. It is while we are building skills. It can seem like it's taking forever, but in the scope of your dog's life, it is not long term. Being creative, outside the box strategies are needed sometimes. If you come up with something that you think might work, discuss it or implement it and try it. Look at it from the angles of, could this cause harm? Could there be an injury from this? Could this set my dog back? Weigh those pros and cons and then try your outside the box strategy. I had a client who had a dog that would just absolutely tear things up when she would walk outside to go to the mailbox. We got a remote treat dispenser and a camera, and we set up some agility jumps in the house with some runner rugs because her dog loved them. Because the dog needed something to do when she walked out the house instead of jumping on the couch and trying to rip it apart. Um, and we couldn't, I mean, we were not even talking about like supervised separation. We already went through the protocols of like touching the door, messing with the door to lower that arousal level anyway. But the dog would still, by the time she was coming back in the door, start grabbing at stuff. And by modifying it and putting in activities that this dog will readily just do on their own because they enjoy it, and we're talking like 2 to 3 inches off the floor onto these really nice thick padded runner rugs, we were able to have the dog engage in it, watch it from the camera, and then use the remote treat dispenser because we were still in proximity to pay them out at the end. The dog thought this was fantastic because they were doing it on their own. They were getting an outlet for that arousal level jumping up that they couldn't figure out how to handle on their own, and not having themselves engage in things that were damaging and stressful for the human, but were the release for that dog. Always plan for management failure so that you have fail safes built in to help prevent incidents from that happening. And I say this because it does not matter how great of a management plan you have, management fails. So when people talk about having things like inner household aggression issues, they have issues where their kids and their dogs, they don't trust their dog with their kids. Their kids are mean to their dogs. Sometimes you have people that come over to your house that don't respect your boundaries with your dogs. You have to have fail safes in place. And I discussed this very, very briefly in the, like prepping your pet for holidays and advocating for your pet during the holidays with using locks on a door. You can put signs up, you can tell people. Human beings will decide they're going to do what they want to do. And sometimes, if it's family, they think they know better than you. And when they're the one that's injured from it, all of a sudden it's your fault and your dog's fault when it was their fault in the first place. So when we look at stuff, if we have a dog that is a bite risk to people and you want to have guests over, we should be working on having your dog be comfortable in their own space, having an X pen around the door, having a lock on the door, going through multiple steps for things, maybe an alarm on the door, so that if someone decides to open the door or try to open the door or a lock gets forgotten, you know immediately that something is there and you can jump in to help prevent it from escalating, or you can just prevent it from happening all on its own. If you have issues with dogs that have dog to dog aggression issues, okay, so you double baby getting. If you're separating your house, what I call modified crate and rotate, because we're not using crates, we're just separating the house into like two different living areas. One dog is in one side, one dog is in the other side. we're not having a door or a walkway or a gate that goes straight out into the other living space. We're going to double it. And yeah, it's a pain because you have to deal with them moving on opposite sides. But at the same time, those gates are moving like that so that you have to close the one before you open the other. So if the one were to fail, you still have the other. And that's hugely important because the last thing that you want to do is have to deal with an incident on your own or backsliding in all of the hard work that you've done. So, management is preventing the unwanted behavior from being practiced and reinforced. And it is super huge because when we're building all of these nice new skills, to teach our dogs how to feel differently, how to respond differently, how to behave differently around stimulus in general, and for whatever the unwanted behaviors are. And I think it's also really important to note there are normal, natural dog behaviors that have to be met. That's why a needs assessment is so important. Because if you have a dog who, when you leave, they rip your throw pillows up, but they don't have any toys because they rip them up and you think it's a waste. Dogs dissect things. So you have to make sure that they have things that they can dissect, whether that's supervised or unsupervised. You can give them enrichment activities. You can give them dig boxes. You can give them those little puzzle plushies where they can pull little tiny things out of like the holes. And you can give them stuff that they can unstuff that's a little safer and they're like smaller toys that get put back in. So there's things that you can give them to satiate that need so that they're not messing with your furniture but that allows that normal, natural behavior to occur. Um, so, starting with your needs assessment, making sure that you're meeting your dog's needs physically, so socially, um, nutritionally, and mentally, and then building in management to prevent the access to things that you don't want, so that you can then teach them what to do to replace it. So it's like we're stopping something over here from being practiced, while over here we're building this new skill, but they don't come together right away because what triggers this behavior is being taught separate from it. As soon as this behavior gets really good, it then gets moved to the what triggers this so that it replaces what was here. But it can't be done unless we have management. So understanding management, understanding how to implement management is going to be really important for you along your journey with your dog. And yeah, I hope that this was helpful. Thank you for listening to my voice for the last 22 minutes. And as always, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. www.allbigcanines, spelled out canines.com. You can also join us on the Reactive and Aggressive Dog Community group on Facebook. And we also have the online The Course, which is for those of you who don't have Facebook, it is the online version through our online school. And I hope that you guys survived this holiday and that you enjoyed this and took some helpful information away. Have a great day.